everyone, it's Marie and welcome to another video. So I'm finally getting back into filming these sit-down videos. If you didn't know, I'm actually filming this from Australia right now. I'm currently living on the Whitsundays on Hayman's Island, and I've been here for about 5 weeks and I'm loving it. One thing I did realise though since I got here is that I didn't take full advantage of my time in New Zealand, where I could have filmed a whole bunch of New Zealand themed videos. So I'm just jumping on that now. Before I start filming any Australia videos, I'm just going to get through a whole bunch of New Zealand themed videos. So first of all, if you have any videos you want to see about New Zealand, like working in New Zealand, finding work, saving money while living in New Zealand, finding a house in New Zealand, that kind of stuff, culture shocks, things like that, just leave a comment below and I'm sure I can get through it and make some videos about New Zealand. I'm also going to be making some travel guides, some city guides, things like that, because I did live in New Zealand a whole year and I absolutely loved it. It was like a second home to me. So without further ado, let's just get on with this video. Here are 11 culture shocks that I noticed between living in England, where I'm from, and living in New Zealand. Let's go. So first of all, I just want to say these are simple cultural differences. If you're Kiwi or English, don't get offended by any of this. None of it is an attack on any particular country. I absolutely adore New Zealand so much. So, you know, if any of this sounds negative, it's not. It's just things I find are different between England and New Zealand. The first difference I noticed was the driving in New Zealand is so much easier and simpler. I actually did make a UK to New Zealand driving culture shock video. I'll link it up here if you haven't already seen it, but basically, I love driving in New Zealand, and yes, I know the roads are a little more windy than most other countries. That doesn't bother me too much. What I loved about New Zealand driving is that the highways are so easy. In England we have 4, 5, 6 lane motorways. We can be stuck in traffic for like 8 hours. If you've been sat on the M25 for hours, leave a comment. It happens. So many motorways and dual carriageways and single carriageways. In England, you want to drive 4 hours down the road, you're going to have to go through at least 4 different motorways. In New Zealand, that just is not really a thing. They have state highways that go down the whole country, and there's only like a few state highways in the whole country, like between islands. And it's just so much easier to drive around. You get on one highway, you're pretty much going through the state towns as you go. In England, if you want to pass through a small town, you have to merge off the motorway, go into that town, then merge back onto the motorway. Another thing that makes driving easier in New Zealand is that you're not legally required to have insurance. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have insurance, I'm saying it makes it easier when borrowing a car from a friend. There was often times that my car was broken down, I was getting it repaired, and I just wanted to borrow my friend's car for a day, and I could do that so much easier in New Zealand. Same with lending my car to other people. In England you have to like ring, check you have insurance, check you're fully comp, if not get yourself on their insurance for the day. It's just a real headache to drive someone's car for a few hours in England. Whereas in New Zealand you can just borrow someone's car, no big deal, it's so easy. Definitely watch the driving culture shocks video if you haven't already, because that goes into way more detail. The second difference I noticed was the postal service. It's only 3 days a week in New Zealand. In England we have it 6 days a week, Monday to Saturday, and we only have Sundays off with the post, whereas in New Zealand it's only 3 days a week. And I think that's because less people shop online in New Zealand, and also things are a bit more paperless there, and also there's less population, right? There's what, 74 million in England and like 4.6 million in New Zealand. Don't quote me on those statistics, but I think that's about right. And the countries are the same size in mass. I'm talking about the UK here, by the way, not just England itself. But still, there's a lot more people living in England than there is in New Zealand. So there's definitely, you know, more demand, I guess, for more regular post over there. Okay, so the third difference, and this was a big one, is the natural disasters in New Zealand. They aren't a thing in England. For example, when I was living in Tauranga, we see tsunami warning signs. We don't have tsunamis really in England. Same with when I was living in Christchurch on the South Island. Obviously there was the big earthquake 7 years ago, and I, you know, really experienced that side of Christchurch, like what they all went through when I was living there. But yeah, it's just interesting reading signs saying earthquake safe house, take out earthquake insurance, certain buildings being built now earthquake safe, the same in Wellington and Kaikoura and other parts of New Zealand where it's prone to earthquakes. That's just not a thing you have to consider or think about in England. Yes, we get minor earthquakes, but nothing compared to the scale of things that they can get over in New Zealand. So yeah, it's just not something you have to think about. Another thing, obviously, when I was doing the Tongariro Alpine Crossing on the North Island, volcano warning signs. So, you know, when I was hiking it was actually an active volcano that you hike across. You know, it has signs telling you like what to be aware of if there's lava coming out of the volcano, like if you see smoke or whatever, where to go, what to do, all that kind of stuff. That's just not something you consider in England. We don't have volcanoes. So yeah, it was just interesting being aware of natural disasters that could occur when you're living there. That's something you just don't consider at all back home in England. So the fourth difference, and this is kind of along the same lines, is the geothermal activity in New Zealand. I love it so much, and it's one of the reasons I loved the North Island, and if I lived in New Zealand I would probably live on the North Island. I just love it. It's so awesome living in Tauranga, being able to go in a thermal hot pool after work, or being able to drive to Rotorua and swim in the thermal rivers for free. Honestly, mind-blowing, swimming in a river that's heated by the geothermal activity. That's just not a thing we get in the UK at all, and I just loved it so much. I thought it was awesome. Okay, so the fifth difference, once again another natural thing. New Zealand for me is like 99% beautiful nature. That's why I love the country so much. I'm a real earth person, so yeah, there's going to be quite a few culture shocks in this theme, I guess. But it's the mountains and the terrain in New Zealand. We don't get that in England at all, especially the South Island. I did so many incredible, beautiful, mind-blowing hikes. You can hike above the clouds, you can hike and see glaciers. We do not have that in England at all. I remember going to the Peak District and thinking that was cool. The Peak District is this tiny hill compared to the mountains and terrain of New Zealand. It's just absolutely breathtakingly gorgeous. Milford Sound, Doubtful Sound, the Fjord National Park. Honestly, it's all just so beautiful, and the hiking in New Zealand is so great. I love to have a good hike. So yeah, for me, it's just a big culture shock being around all those mountains and all that beauty. I know you get that up in Scotland. I've not actually visited Scotland, so that's like bad travel points to me. But I'm talking about England here. I'm just not used to that at all. Also just the open space. There is so much untouched land, places where people don't live, people don't go. You can be out in the middle of nowhere and not see anyone, or just see mountains and terrain for miles. In England, generally, you can be in the middle of nowhere, but you still always see towns and cities quite close by because there's so many people living there. Whereas in New Zealand, you can see forever and never see a town or city. It's just gorgeous. So yeah. The sixth difference was just how green it is, especially the North Island. It's very subtropical up there. And for me, that was very different to living in England. You know, you have fern trees and palm trees in the North Island. It's absolutely stunningly gorgeous. It's a vibrant green that I've never seen anywhere else in the world. Maybe when I was in the Cameron Highlands in Malaysia, it was similar, but still, it's a different kind of green. Something about all the green forever in New Zealand is just so gorgeous, and being surrounded by that much earthy green. I don't know, I'm a big nature person, like I said, so I just loved all the green for miles. It was just so beautiful. I loved it so much. The seventh difference is simply being on the southern hemisphere. That's a big difference for sure. Last Christmas was my first Christmas in the summer, having a barbecue on Christmas Day, being able to swim in Lake Wanaka on Christmas Day. Not something you could do in England at all when it's freezing cold. And the main thing for me was being able to celebrate New Year's Eve at a festival. As you know, in the past when I was younger, I loved going to music festivals. It's my thing. I'm a real summer person as well, so being able to celebrate New Year's Eve with a crop top and like shorts was awesome. Letting in the new year in the beautiful warm weather at a festival was just a great experience, and honestly I think I kind of prefer it. The only negative about that is obviously the winter does go on forever here. I was working in the inlands, like, you know, Marama, all of winter last year, and it was so cold in New Zealand. Like, it got to like minus figures. It was very cold, and yeah, it was just, the whole winter just goes on forever. At least in the Northern Hemisphere you have this, you know, the festivities and the holidays to kind of like make wintertime bearable. In New Zealand it's just winter. Everything happens in the summer, which I kind of like in one way, but it did make the winter a little bit difficult to manage. So I would probably live on the North Island if I lived there long term, so that I didn't have to have a terrible long winter. So the eighth difference is definitely the mouldy culture in New Zealand. That's just not something we have in England at all. And I really enjoyed experiencing that part of New Zealand. I was very lucky that I made some good friends that were mouldy or half mouldy. So I do always refer to them as mouldy, not Maori, because that's how I was taught by the mouldy to say it. And yeah, I was very lucky that I had friends that had mouldy in them. I had co-workers, bosses, supervisors that were all mouldy or half mouldy. So I feel like I got a good authentic experience of being around people who are mouldy in New Zealand, and not just say going to Rotorua and watching some, you know, kind of event and stuff that's based around the mouldy culture. I actually kind of lived with them. I actually lived in a house in Christchurch with people who were mouldy, so I really got to kind of just live with them, if that makes sense, which I found really interesting. I think that the mouldy culture and the white Kiwi kind of culture integrates together very well in New Zealand, better than the indigenous and the white Australians here integrate together. I hope I'm not offending anyone when I say this, but I'm just kind of going by what I experienced when I was living there and what some of my Māori friends told me. But I feel like the Māori in New Zealand are, you know, well respected. In the past they weren't, and it's really sad how they were treated when kind of things first, when, you know, the white people first went to New Zealand. But now I feel like there's a much better integration, and yeah, I just feel that the Māori culture really impacts New Zealand so much, in terms of, you know, how everyone in New Zealand tends to respect and love the land. The land is very sacred in New Zealand to everyone, to all Kiwis. I think they're all brought up to believe and to kind of like respect the country and the land and the earth, and to be clean and tidy. And also when I was living in Tauranga, for example, on Mount Manganui, my Kiwi friends often told me, you know, old Māori stories, like about the mountains having names and the history, and how one mountain fell in love with the other, and it reminded me a bit of the movie Moana. I don't know, it was just really cool kind of hearing all of that side of New Zealand, all the Māori culture. Obviously there's lots of cities and towns that have Māori names, and I learnt a lot of Māori pronunciations. A lot of things in New Zealand are pronounced the Māori way, and a lot of Māori words are still used. So yeah, I just thought it was really interesting and cool to experience that side of it. That's just something you don't have in England, and honestly I think that the Māori is what makes New Zealand so special and so beautiful, and just so respectful to the earth, if that makes sense. I don't know. I hope I haven't offended anyone here, but I just really enjoyed that side of New Zealand and experiencing that, if that makes sense. Okay, so the next big difference I noticed, and I noticed this literally the moment I stepped off the plane in Auckland, and it is the lack of history in New Zealand. And I know there is history in New Zealand, like you have mountains as old as time. I'm just talking, the architectural history is not there at all. I just travelled Europe for a year, and I'm from England, where we have cobblestone streets and old historical buildings around every corner. And in New Zealand that's just not a thing. When I was in New Zealand, obviously I lived in Christchurch, and I visited Oamaru and Dunedin, where there is some old architecture, but still it's nothing on the scale of Europe. Especially I remember one particular time when I was with my co-workers and we were driving to Dunbeck near Ranfurly in the South Island, and we went past this sign that said historic bridge to your left. We get out and view this famous historic bridge, and it literally looked the same as any bridge you would see in England down the street. It really wasn't a special historic bridge in my eyes, because I've seen so many of them, but my co-workers were pretty excited to see that because they'd never seen a historic bridge before. I just thought it was very funny. Yeah, so that's just one moment I kind of think about. It definitely does lack in architectural history in New Zealand. It's a very new country in terms of development and buildings. So that's just a big culture shock for me, definitely coming from England, where we have a lot of history. So the 10th difference is simply the casual lifestyle and work life in New Zealand. Kiwis are just really casual, chilled out people, much more relaxed than the English. I feel like in England everyone is kind of suspicious of you, and you know, they're a little afraid to trust people, whereas in New Zealand Kiwis are much more relaxed and trusting and easygoing. For example, you want to rent a room in a house in England, you're probably having to pay a month or two rent up front, a deposit, you're probably having to have credit checks and references. In New Zealand you can ring someone off Facebook, ask if you can rent their room, pay maybe 1 week bond up front, and then you're in. That's it. It's so much different to England. Also with starting a job in New Zealand, I feel like it's quite simple. You can get jobs on Facebook, you can just ring them and ask them for a job. Often they just tell you to come in for an interview or you start tomorrow. In England there's much longer job application processes and it's much more complicated. And I'm not saying there aren't complicated jobs to get in New Zealand on a more professional level, but I'm just talking casual, easy work here. In England and in New Zealand it's just very different. I just feel like the Kiwi lifestyle is much more chilled out and casual, and people are just less likely to make a big deal of things. They're just much more chilled out there, if that makes sense. And so the last difference, and I added this on right at the last minute because I remembered it, it's that I remember seeing in New Zealand quite often people would put their dogs in the back of their trucks or utes, and these are like trucks or utes that have no like roof or walls, or it's just like, you know, a trailer almost thing on the back of your truck. Utes are a big thing in New Zealand, by the way. Guys in New Zealand don't want sports cars, they want utes. But yeah, people often put their dogs in the back of their trucks or utes, and the dogs just kind of have a ride in the back and it's really chill. Whereas in England, I think the RSPCA would be called, and you would be in big trouble if you had your dog in the back of your truck, or you know, without any walls or anything, if it's just sitting there on the back. Whereas in New Zealand it's very normal. I think here in Australia it's a bit more common too, because there's a lot more farmy people in New Zealand, and I feel like it's quite normal to just put your farm dog or your dog on the back of your car. Whereas in England I feel like, yeah, it just wouldn't happen. I hope you know what I mean. That was all my culture shocks. This definitely isn't all of them though. This is only part 1. I'm making a Culture Shocks part 2 video soon because there are actually tons of differences between England and New Zealand. So yeah, if you haven't already, definitely subscribe to see more videos about living in New Zealand. I did make a ton of New Zealand travel vlogs. If you haven't seen them already, I'll link them here. And I just travelled India, some of Malaysia. I'm in Australia living here now. After this I plan to do more of Southeast Asia and India and go back to England, go to Canada maybe, I don't know, lots of travel still ahead of me. So if you want to follow my journey and my life of travelling and working as I go and stuff, definitely subscribe to see more. And yeah, leave a comment, have you been to New Zealand? And if you have, how did it differ from your country? Okay, so thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.